I don't have it up right now.
Why are you not prepared for this episode?
Sorry.
Generate a dad joke right now. This is ridiculous.
Welcome to A Safe Place for Boys, compassionate conversations about masculinity in media. I'm Kelcee Sykes. I'm a writer and editor and lover of stories. With me is my masculinity correspondent, Dr. Spencer Todd Bennington, PhD. Spencer, tell the good folks a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Kelcee, I'm coming in live from the field. Can you hear me? Am I transmitting okay?
Yeah, how's the traffic?
Oh my gosh, it's just a notch short of deadly, I have to say. I'm surprised I haven't... Yep. Almost just got ran off the road right there. That's masculinity for you, live from the field.
Well, you need to get the helicopter up much higher than that, I think.
Oh my gosh, I didn't remember I was the guy in the sky today. I thought I was down in the field, Kelcee.
Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I am Dr. Spencer Todd Bennington IV.
You're not.
I am not. I'm the first and only of my kind. I am a teacher of writing, rhetoric, hip-hop, and martial arts. And also I do this podcast where we talk about boys and junk.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me in this brave new world of podcasting. So I wanted to take a few minutes in this, our inaugural episode, to give people a rundown of what this show is, what we want to do with it, and why we decided to call it A Safe Place for Boys. So we both have academic backgrounds. You maybe a little bit more than me.
And a foreground, if you will. I still do it.
Yeah, I no longer do anymore. I just like doing research for fun.
Sicko.
We both have a history of studying topics surrounding writing and storytelling and myth and gender, both sort of formally and informally. And I, in particular, have a fascination with the way that the stories we take in, whether that's through the books we read, movies and TV shows we watch, video games, or from just like religious leaders, our parents, our teachers, whatever shape those stories come in, and how they affect our attitudes and beliefs and behavior, often in ways that we don't realize, and especially when it comes to understanding of gender and sexuality. And so anytime I'm interacting with media of any kind, really, I have a sort of running commentary in the back of my head, like, what kind of lessons is the show trying to teach us about gender roles, and who are they trying to target with this message, and is this a positive message or a harmful one, or is it somewhere in the middle? And this makes me insufferable in many ways. I am not a fun person to just like sit and watch a movie with, but I spend a lot of time thinking about this kind of messaging. And I also spend a lot of time wondering how someone, particularly boys or people who are responsible for raising and educating boys, navigate a media landscape that so frequently reinforces these violent and harmful ideas about what it means to be a man and how you should treat people who aren't men. So I was inspired to put together a sort of positive masculinity watch list of movies and TV shows. And I wanted to do some research into the messages that these pieces of media put forth, and then ask some of the wonderful men that I know to weigh in on how they were affected by these stories. So my first question for you is, what attracted you to this show idea when I first described it to you?
So similar to you, I am a person who identifies as a teacher. Dissimilar to you, I am a person who identifies as a man.
And you do have to say it like that every time.
You do. So... The thing that people may not know about me is that though I professionally am paid to teach people how to write on the collegiate level, longer than that, I've been teaching people how to fight in various levels, from children to adults. And I mean that both in terms of sport. The martial art that I teach is Taekwondo, and it's an Olympic sport, so it's a combat sport, something that can be competitive and physical and athletic without necessarily being violent. But of course, we also teach a self-defense aspect to martial arts, and we teach meditative and therapeutic aspects to martial arts, honestly, so that people can avoid violence. So there's a lot of anti-violent messaging in the pedagogy that I employ on the mat or in a classroom. It doesn't matter. And so similar to what you said, I'm constantly thinking about whether or not the stories we tell and the texts that we ask students to engage with and possibly even mimic or research, if they're promoting ideas that are, and I'll just use a binary here, violent or anti-violent. And I think it's most important for addressing the people who exist at the top of any hegemonic order, which are in this day, time, country, world, straight white men, and to ask the people who have the most power and privilege to consider the ramifications, the ethics, and the possible outcomes of not wielding that power responsibly, as great role model Spider-Man's Uncle Ben would tell us. So that's why I'm into it. I find it to be a personal mission that it's important for a person like myself, a straight white man, to take stock and to try and use all my youth pastor energy to focus on the boys like me, because gosh knows that when I was a angsty teen, I was filled with rage and a lot of emotions that I didn't understand, and they could have very easily been channeled toward violence instead of something constructive or explorative or creative. And I think it's worth finding those folks who are teetering and just tip them towards the nice things. So I thought it was a really swell idea to gather together a bunch of media that we can put our stamp of approval on and say, hey, this is something that will help you with the boys. These boys, hey, these boys out there, they need some help. And there's some things out there that'll help you with them.
And now my second question is, why did we decide to call this podcast A Safe Place for Boys? What does that phrase mean to you?
I like to think of the title as being inclusive. It's a safe place for all boys, right? Not just boys that look like me, and not even just like boys that are boys. Maybe it's just people who want to hang out in the treehouse. It's whatever. And I'm glad that the word safe is included there, because if we're talking ultimately, in my perspective, about issues of violence and anti-violence, I need to know that we can facilitate those discussions in ways that are safe, in ways that are not oppressive or that reinforce dominant stereotypes or that exclude people, or anything like that. And so, I think I already said the word treehouse. That's what I imagine.
Me too. Yeah. In my mind, the safe place for boys is it's a treehouse. We've got our beanbag chairs. We've got snacks.
Fruit roll-ups.
And you can come and you can watch a movie with us. And the safety for me is I want this to be a space where we can ask questions and potentially make mistakes. And there will not be the sort of repercussions that one typically imagines for people who maybe do not perform masculinity in the ways that they have been told that they must in order to get the approval of the world. So it's a place for boys to come and have a good time and ask questions and maybe not find answers, but at least not be penalized for asking in the first place.
And for sure not find the wrong answers, because that's a hard thing for boys. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And we can't always guarantee the right answers, but we'll do enough research to not give you the wrong ones, okay?
Yeah.
We'll give you that much assurance, all right? Just want to put that out there.
Yeah, that's a good disclaimer. We're going to do our best here, but, again, I just like doing research about things I find interesting, so we'll see what we can do for you. And speaking of, what movie did we watch this week?
You were gonna do that. So I can't wait until we get our friend and composer John Williams on this show to talk us through the score that he wrote for the movie that we watched this week, Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park.
Real dino DNA. It was chock full of it.
Full of what, music or dino DNA?
Correct.
Both, yeah. So we'll start out here with a very brief synopsis. I'm going to assume if you are listening to this that you have at least some sense of what the film Jurassic Park is about. And
hey guys, it's about dinosaurs.
It's about dinosaurs. And if you haven't seen it, you should go and see it. This conversation will be greatly enriched if you have seen the movie in question. But we'll do a brief sort of plot rundown just to make sure we are all on the same page here.
We're actually going to do it twice because the movie itself gives you its own plot rundown about Winway through. If you just go about Winway through, you'll be about where the water tower used to be.
You're doing great.
I know. All right, why don't you go ahead then?
Okay. So Jurassic Park, which is based on a novel by a writer named Michael Crichton, which I don't think I knew how to pronounce his name until like maybe a month or so ago. But that is his name, Michael Crichton. And it follows a Scottish capitalist. We don't really know exactly what his job is, but his name is John Hammond. He is a wealthy Scottish man who has, in the course of his life, discovered a way to resurrect dinosaurs using DNA taken from preserved mosquitoes. And of course, as all great scientists do, he decides to immediately open a theme park on an island off of Costa Rica. But gosh darn it, wouldn't you know it, the dang old dinosaurs keep eating people. So John Hammond is in a bit of a legal hot water. He is being told by the various legal forces in his life that they will not allow this park to open until it gets the approval of some experts in the field. So instead of going to find experts in like park security or animal handling or anything like that, he goes and finds two paleontologists named Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler, and says, come to my island, come look at all this cool stuff I'm doing. He bribes them by saying, I'll pay for all of your research projects for the next 3 years. Just come to my island. It's going to be great. It's going to be fun. It's going to be so exciting. He steals champagne out of their fridge and just opens it. He puts on a big show for these people. So they go to his island.
But most importantly, he hires the third expert.
Well, experts in quotation marks. There is a third scientist. Well, what does he say? Chaotician.
I study chaos theory.
Chaos theory. Dr. Ian Malcolm, played by Jeff Goldblum in arguably his sexiest role. He is half naked the whole movie for no discernible reason, really. But they're bringing these three experts along with a lawyer representing the shareholders, the insurance company, somebody. A lawyer who's there to be like, I don't know about all this. And they bring him to the island where they discover dinosaurs. And he takes them on this grand tour of his facility where they are able to immediately break out of the ride car. Like, all they have to do is lift up the bars and they can just wander back into the lab area where all the baby dinosaurs are.
Which, by the way, foreshadows they just didn't put locks on anything. That's twice or three times in the movie. They just get out of these moving autonomous vehicles or whatever. Yeah, they just dip. They're just like, oh, this is dumb. There's
a recurring problem of security here at Jurassic Park that will become significantly worse as the movie goes on.
Oh, yeah, you think that's bad. And what do you see what happens next?
They discover, they go back to this lab area where B.D. Wong is there, and he explains that...
Top billed actor B.D. Wong for his one scene.
Not quite top billed. He is like fourth billed, though, which is strange, because he's in this movie for about 30 seconds. But he explains to them that, we brought these dinosaurs back with this frog DNA, but don't worry, they can't breed with each other. They're all female because, we've done some genetic tinkering. And over the course of this scene, you see each of the scientists in turn kind of get more and more wary of this project. Ian Malcolm, of course, is upset from the very beginning. Ellie Sadler starts to get upset when she learns about the tinkering with the reproductive process that's happening. And Alan Grant is upset when he finds out that they have resurrected the most dangerous dinosaur of all, which is, of course, the Velociraptor.
I have to just pause you because you've said resurrected twice. Now I need to take issue. They're not making Jesus dinosaurs. They are in fact making clones of dinosaurs from extant dino DNA.
Okay,
in combination with genetic sequences found in frog.
Okay, you're right.
They have not.
You're right. Well, I'm not a scientist. Yeah, I'm not a chaotician, so I don't know the ins and outs of genetics the way that Ian Malcolm does as a mathematician. Sure. I apologize.
Just didn't want all those comments. I mean, I do want all of your comments down below, wherever that is, but like...
Yeah, well, please don't email me being like, it's not actually resurrection. I don't. It's a fictional story. Take it up with Michael Crichton.
Now, to be clear... Kelcee just said that Jurassic Park is a fictional story, not the story of Jesus and the resurrection. Again, trying to avoid unnecessary emails. Moving on.
Yeah, we will talk about that at a later date, or never. Probably never.
Are we going to talk about the passion on this show? Moving on.
Oh, my God. Anyway, okay, so despite the fact that they are all in this room saying, like, hey, John Hammond, this seems like a bad idea. It seems like we shouldn't do this. He's like, no, it's fine. I brought my grandchildren. Here, go get in these Ford brand SUVs that travel along a track that you can't take them off of, and we're going to go see some dinosaurs. And so they set off, the lawyer, the two grandchildren named Lexi and Tim, and the three scientists are all in these SUVs. They're going around the park. Meanwhile, in the background, Newman from Seinfeld he's upset because he and Samuel L. Jackson are doing all of the IT work for, again, this park is the size of an entire island, and they have two people writing all of the code and running the entire fully automated security systems that runs this entire park. It's run from like 4 computers that the two of them are just typing furiously on at all times. Newman's name in this one is Nedry. I don't know if that's his first or last name, but he's called Nedry. And he is unhappy because he is not being paid very well. There is sort of a thread of labor issues running through this story as well. And so he's decided he's going to steal some of the embryos of the dinosaurs, sneak them out of the park, and give them to a competitor because he is mad at John Hammond. And so in the course of doing that, he starts disabling the security systems and the electricity throughout the park, which means that the dinosaur cages are open. And as you can imagine, some chaos ensues from that, which involves all of the dinosaurs getting out, several human characters dying, and Alan Grant, who starts off the story as sort of like turning up his nose at the idea of having children, has to bond with the two children in a series of sort of unlikely escapes. And, you know, one at a time, every main character gets to sort of be heroic. And at the end, they all escape the island via helicopter because the dinosaurs can no longer be contained. Did I miss anything?
Nedry did not become Flat Newman in this movie.
And that's a shame.
But, notably, they did not resolve the fact that the embryos he stole got washed away as he was, like, getting murdered by a weird dinosaur. They got washed away into mud and water, and they're presumably going to be buried and, like, fossilized again on this island spot, so...
Or maybe someone will come along and find them and make more dinosaurs, despite the fact that the pretty clear lesson, among the many lessons of Jurassic Park, is, hey, don't try to remake dinosaurs. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
Just don't do it. So that brings me to my first question. Do you remember how old you were when you first watched Jurassic Park?
Oh, yeah. 26.
26? Really?
Maybe 24.
Wow.
Yeah. How old was I when I met you? Because it was only a year or so before I met you, actually, that I'd seen it for the first time. I'd seen scenes maybe, like, off and on. You know, at camp, they'd play a movie, but you'd never pay attention to it. You'd be doing something else. Or, like, you'd scroll through TV and it'd be on, and you're like, oh, dinosaur, you know. But no, never sat down and watched it until I was an air quotes adult.
Yeah, that's my experience also. I remember knowing a lot of people who were obsessed with Jurassic. Like, there was always
Sure.
some kid in your class who was just, like, obsessed with Jurassic Park. But I didn't watch this movie until 2020, despite the fact that it was, in fact, the most popular movie the year that I was born.
Funny.
And I remember it being sort of in the cultural conversation, so I probably could have told you roughly what the movie was about prior to the time that I watched it. But I had never actually seen it until then. But you know me, I love to miss a zeitgeist by 25 years and only watch something when no one else cares about it or wants to talk about it anymore.
Having both only watched this movie in adulthood, I gotta say, I'm a little hesitant to be like, show this movie to your kids. Like,
I think if I had watched this movie prior to age, like, 16, it would have scared me to actual death. I would have just died of fright.
this movie is not on streaming services for free for us, so we actually rented it from your local library. Plug, like, go to your local library. They have great stuff. We got it on DVD, and we were chuckling at the beginning of it because it's rated PG-13, and, like, we're laughing at the MPAA description because it's, like, for in scenes of intense terror, something intense terror. And I remember just being like, pfft, so stupid. Like, but now I'm sitting here thinking, the number I just had in my head was like, I don't think I would show this to someone until they're like 12, maybe a mature 10-year-old, like, cutoff. Like, but they got to be in double digits. I'm not gonna. And, like, if they're 10, they're watching it with me.
Yeah.
If they're 13, I'll let them watch it with their friends. Like, I'm gonna side with the MPAA on this because it's scary. This movie is terrifying.
Yeah. So do you want to hear something funny?
Yeah.
So my next question was going to be, do you think Jurassic Park is a horror movie?
Yes.
And I wrote my notes several weeks ago before we rewatched it. So the last time I had watched it had been in 2020, and I sort of remembered it. And so what I wrote is, and I quote, "There are definitely tense sequences and some blood and gore. To me, tonally, this movie still feels more like an action adventure. It's the Spielberg of it all, with the big sweeping John Williams score and the beautiful, groundbreaking special effects. Even once the characters start to realize they're in trouble, there's still a sort of plucky optimism rather than the mounting dread you get in horror. Like, I never worried that the children were going to die, you know?"
So last night may have been like the third time I saw this movie, and I keep wanting to say John Williams' name because I legitimately do want to have him on this show as a guest, and I was just messaging him on social medias. But also, the music last night...
To be clear, we have a friend named John Williams, not John Williams, the composer.
I didn't want to spoil the mystery. But the music last night, it like was the first time it rang eerie to me. Like the final scene when you hear that supposed to be hopeful, and they're flying with the birds, and it's like, oh, it's okay for the future to move on. Dinosaurs evolved, and they became birds, and we too can fly now, and the helicopters we evolved, and so we can marriage of science and but meanwhile, like, there's a freaking island of monsters and dead people.
So many people die.
Like, it's not okay. It's not okay. And so that music, yeah, it was like getting under my skin by the end of the movie last night. It really was. It felt out of place in an eerie way, legitimately. Like, if you stop and think for a second.
Yeah, it's not a hopeful ending because the dinosaurs are still out there. So I was keeping a list of moments as we were watching last night that I thought were scary. And like the whole just second half is scary, but there's this scene where the two kids are alone in the SUV because the lawyer just like sprints out of the car.
He left us.
And there's
great
this sort
acting
of
by the kids.
Glass panel on the top, and the kids are sort of laying back looking up at the glass panel, and the T-Rex smashes its face into the glass panel so it falls on the kids. And the only thing keeping them from being eaten by this T-Rex is their tiny little, like, 7-year-old arms holding up this glass panel and trying to force the T-Rex back out. And I was like, that's the scariest thing I think I've ever seen. I've watched a lot of horror movies in the last year or so. That's so scary.
And not to get too heady on you, but I pointed out that they recreated that scene 2 or 3 times in the film with different sort of monsters. Mm-hmm. The one that was most notable was later when Timmy and Grant had to climb down out of the tree where Timmy was trapped in the car, and then the car starts falling, but it looks like it's chasing them down the tree.
Yes.
And it reminds us that all of these things are mechanical, cultural, invented monsters. And they all go back to one source, and it's the same scary villain.
Yep. Yep. Oh, God, it's so scary. And there is some, like, there's some good, like, scream queen action happening in this movie. I kind of forgot, like, you don't think of Laura Dern's character the same way that we think of, like, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, for example. But there's some, she is just screaming, like full top of her lungs screaming, running from dinosaurs multiple times.
She was
movie.
like in the car the first time she just belted one. Something was happening, but it was like, I was like, whoa. And again, I'll say it again, the little kids, the little girls screaming and crying, like, whoa now.
Yeah.
Good screaming.
Oh, yeah. So it's definitely, we can agree that it's a horror movie by horror trope standards.
So scary.
But there's also a fair number of real-world horrifying ideas present in this story. So in my research, I found an essay in Escapist magazine by a writer named Darren Mooney titled Jurassic Park is a movie about evolving fatherhood. And it evokes a theory created by an academic named Barbara Creed called the monstrous feminine. And the idea of the monstrous feminine, which was coined in a book of that same name, which was also released in the year 1993, the same year as Jurassic Park. It's a horror trope, essentially, which states that whenever a woman is portrayed as a monster in a piece of media, typically in a piece of horror media, it is almost always in relation to her reproductive or quote-unquote mothering function. And especially for men in horror and science fiction, the fear comes from the idea that women will castrate men and take on all the reproductive and parental functions themselves. And that, you know, women are really out to just find a way to make men obsolete, particularly for reproduction. And once we don't need them for reproduction anymore, we will just kill them off. We will be a society that no longer needs men at all, which manages to be degrading to everyone, both men and women. It's just kind of a insulting fear across the board. But Barbara Creed's theory is that fear on the part of men motivates a lot of how they choose to depict female characters in horror media and science fiction media. And in his essay, Mooney argues that this fear of the monstrous feminine is, whether he knows it or not, motivating John Hammond in particular as a person who is quite comfortable with the idea of domination. He sets the dominoes of this story in motion because his particular brand of masculinity, being informed as it is by, you know, his race as a European white man and his outlandish wealth that he acquired through flea circuses, unclear. All of that drives his attempt to resurrect the dinosaurs in the first place. Like, only a man like John Hammond would think that was a good idea. And only a man like John Hammond would then so thoroughly seek to control them once he had created them. Ian Malcolm, who we'll talk more about him later, his role seems to be just making the subtext text. You could just do a supercut of all his lines throughout this movie and know exactly what it was about on like a thematic level.
To be clear, I think he wants to make the subtext sexed.
Absolutely, he does. Yeah. No, you're correct. Okay. You're correct. Right. Which makes the part that I'm about to quote a little bit suspect. But he refers to this enterprise as the rape of the natural world. And, you know, I'm not always comfortable with the way that word gets thrown around.
Well, but let's put some context here to it because you finish it.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think he's actually using it appropriately here in that what Malcolm is trying to do is not just like do some cool science and like help us study a thing that's been dead for millions of years or whatever. He is trying to exert manifest destiny over a biological process that in many ways has nothing whatsoever to do with him, both because dinosaurs have gone extinct, that he has to use genetic engineering to try to make sure they can't reproduce in the way that they naturally would, and that he then turns this sort of grotesque process into a capitalist enterprise even though he's been repeatedly warned that that is unsafe. And in fact, by the time we get to the events of the movie, someone has already died because of this thing that he has tried to do. And if you think of like sexual assault as something that is motivated by a sense of entitlement to someone else's body and a belief that those bodies exist to provide pleasure or value to you, then I mean, I think the parallels to rape are certainly there. It is taking control over at least a part of the reproductive functioning of something that has nothing to do with you and just kind of twisting it for your own benefit.
There's a layer here that I think we need to acknowledge. And the word rape, I think, is chosen very specifically to connect to this idea, this phrase of the rape of Africa. And the layer that we need to talk about is the identity of Hammond. You said Malcolm earlier. We know you were talking about Hammond. Hammond, right? The old dude, right? So the layer is, he is this sort of heart of darkness, 19th century imperialist, colonialist, capitalist. We don't know how he made his money. We're pretty sure he owns that amber mine, though, that's also just off the coast of, it wasn't Costa Rica, it was a different place in
somewhere else in South America,
yeah.
I remember.
But like the parallels to the, colonization, the violent exploitation of the Congo specifically in the 1900s, 1900s, is, I think, the ivory trade is sort of directly paralleled here with the symbol of amber. And the people who are murdered first are colonized workers. They seem to just be nameless, dark-skinned, local worker working some like dangerous job that they were probably like ill-informed about, and they just get eaten by a velociraptor?
Yeah.
Excuse me? Very much please and thank you. Like, and so like what Hammond sees as exploration is theft. It is, rape in this sense of taking natural resources that do not belong to you at the expense of human life, justifying it by means of either saying that these aren't humans or that they are less valuable than whatever his goal is, the pursuit of knowledge or the development of something real, air quotes, or like the love of his grandchildren, whatever we think it is, like he places that a higher priority than the lives of certain people.
Right.
Which makes him this old school imperialist, capitalist colonizer. And that is, I think, why Malcolm, in part, uses that word.
Yes, I would agree with that. There's another quote from that same scene, again, from me and Malcolm. He said, and I rewound the movie like 4 times to make sure I got it right. He says, "Genetic power is the most awesome force the world has ever seen, and you're wielding it like a kid who's found his dad's gun. It didn't require any discipline to attain it." So not only is he sort of treating people and resources like playthings, he didn't have to do any of the work it took to make any of it happen. He's not a genetic scientist. He is not a paleontologist. He is not a zoologist. He's not even particularly good at running theme parks. He's just a person who had enough money to open up a mine, found a resource, found enough people who were willing to exploit it for him, and found a way to profit from it.
Right. I mean, I made that joke about Spider-Man earlier, but that's literally why Peter Parker has to learn a tragic lesson, because he oopses in to awesome power, and he doesn't know how to use it responsibly, and the direct result of that is someone he loves dearly is killed.
Yes.
And so, the kid finding his dad's gun metaphors, the lawyer objects to it, right? People think it's like tasteless in the moment, in the scene, but like, God, it's so apropos, like, because it is beyond violence. It's deadly. It's catastrophic what this man is doing.
Literally, yeah. There is also this layer of reproductive control, and the idea underscoring male creators' use of the monstrous feminine is that reproduction, specifically like, we want, quote unquote, the female part of reproduction, and everything that goes along with it, expressions of gender, expressions of sexuality, is something that must be controlled by the patriarchy for the safety of everyone. And
the original means of production.
yeah. And I can say, as a person with theoretical childbearing capability living in the United States, which is a horror premise in and of itself, that is one of the scariest ideas in the entire world to me, that people who look and think like John Hammond are very much, in this country and elsewhere in the world, absolutely in complete control of the reproductive bodies, the gender expression, the sexual expression of everyone in their whole societies, and that's a very frightening idea to me. And we don't get a lot of that, mostly because Ellie is the only female character in the scene. But you can see it in that moment where she is looking at a male doctor and saying, "You're doing what?" Like, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, for the dinosaurs, life finds a way. But it is a thing that, people with that kind of power do attempt to do. And of course, one of the other things that Hammond has in common with these wealthy white pseudo-intellectuals of today is just the absolute hubris of it. And the difference being that in this movie, he is proven wrong. There's the scene where he's just eating ice cream and talking about, like, oh, it's all probably going to work out just fine. And like, I was trying to do a good thing, though. And like, if I could just stay in control of all the parts of this, it'll be fine. And Ellie is sitting there saying, no, it won't. These are dinosaurs. You can't control them. You can't control the weather. Like, there are always going to be things that you can't control, especially not, forces of nature like human reproduction, especially human reproduction, also human reproduction, but dinosaur reproduction in this case.
Human dinosaur reproduction. Yeah. It comes up in the third movie, I think.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, no. And by introducing capitalism into the mix as sort of his means of control, that he views everything in the world through this lens of, how can I buy and sell this and give it to shareholders and turn a profit on it, and that being the way that he has learned to see the world, he created his own problem, which is now the villain of the first half of the story, which is Nedry, says, okay, you don't want to pay me enough, because if capitalists never want to pay people enough, I'm going to sell your stuff to somebody else. And that's what sends this whole, problem into motion, in addition to him not wanting to have a real security system that can't just be taken down by one guy. And he ends up risking his own literal family line, his grandchildren, and the lives of his employees for nothing. And then they made 8 more movies about it, but that's beside the point.
I do love, though, that his undoing is a character that is so directly his mirror image foil, just a younger version of him. No, Nedry is not a wide-eyed idealist. He's not doing things for, the love of the children. He's, he's not Santa Claus. That's not what I mean.
He doesn't care about dinosaurs.
Not at all. But he does care about numero uno, just like Hammond. And more importantly, he is totally comfortable with exploitation being his ticket to the top. He's going to steal from the biggest, baddest there is, and that's Hammond, and it's easy, and he's an opportunist, so he's going to do it. And just like, Hammond sees a mosquito in a piece of amber and says, I could make a dinosaur. And he does. And he does.
Yeah, and of course, Nedry's downfall sort of much more viscerally drives home this idea that control is an illusion, because he is the person who is in control of the entire security system of the park, and he thinks that by doing that,
it'll allow him to drive a car.
And he'll be able to escape and make all of this money, and things will be great.
He cannot handle an automobile at all in any amount of weather.
Well, and he's brought down essentially by the same things Hammond is, which is the weather, there's a big storm that for some reason none of these people like plan for. They don't know it's coming, can't possibly see it's coming, even though we hear weather reports throughout the beginning of the movie saying this big storm is coming.
And also the dinosaurs that he let out. Yeah.
He thought he could open the dinosaur cages and they wouldn't come after him for some reason.
I don't know.
It's...
But they both think that way. They think that they're immune to their own BS, and they're not. And that's like one of the most valuable lessons for, future powerful boys watching this to internalize.
So let's move on to our other sort of big idea. This, contrary to what I said before, this is the Spielberg of it all, which is we're going to talk about dads. So lots of Steven Spielberg's movies deal with fatherhood one way or another. So either the fathers are present and the relationship is fraught, in Jaws, where it's like, oh, should I go out and kill this shark for my son or whatever? Or they're absent like they are in E.T. Like, is this
Jaws is about?
It's been a while since I've seen Jaws as well, to be fair, but I think it's about dads.
Okay.
And, E.T., the father is absent, and it's like, is this alien my dad now? I'm a Steven Spielberg scholar. But Jurassic Park is an interesting entry into canon because it deals directly with fatherhood in very direct ways and very oblique ways. I found a quote from the Darren Mooney article that sort of gets at this idea. If you would read it for me, please.
Jurassic Park suggests that the arrogance of such men trying to assert control of the reproductive process will ultimately render them irrelevant. As Malcolm summarizes the movie's plot, and I love this quote, God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs. Sadler completes the thought for him by saying, quote, dinosaurs eat man. Woman inherits the earth. Love it.
Girl power.
Girl power, indeed. And then, so the article goes on to say, Malcolm turns out to be correct to call Hammond on his arrogance. Duh. While wondering, duh included, that was an insert. While wandering through the park with Lex and Tim, Grant discovers that the dinosaurs have found a way to reproduce. The frog DNA that Hammond used to plug the gaps in the quote-unquote dino DNA gave the female dinosaurs the ability to switch genders to ensure perpetuation of the species. Despite Hammond's best efforts, the female dinosaurs have reclaimed their reproductive autonomy. Oopsie! In doing so, they rendered males irrelevant, obsolete.
Okay, so we see this theme of, again, we've got the monstrous feminine, and the big monstrous thing that they've done is say, we can also just become men now. Like, screw you, John Hammond. You tried to put me into a box, and I broke out of that box and had babies anyway.
Screw you, John Williams. You tried to make this a feel-good family film with your terrific score, and I made it a horror film.
Girl power. Technically,
Girl
the dinosaurs are all feminists.
Mm-hmm.
That's my read. So there is definitely in this world, we don't need the men. The dinosaurs don't need the men. Mm-hmm. And Ellie Sadler is saying, in this fictional world where men try to usurp God and destroy the natural order of things, the women will survive. Mm-hmm. So the question for the male humans in the story is like, what role do I play in a world where I am no longer reproductively needed? And the John Hammond answer is to say, no, we double down, we try to control them, we keep them in cages, we take away vital nutrients so that they can't reproduce on their own, and we imprint on all of the babies so that they all love us, and we're everyone's dad, and they have to do what we say. And the other male characters kind of come around to a different idea of how to act as a man appropriately in this new world, quote unquote.
But speaking of new world, one adjective they use to describe Ian Malcolm as like this weirdo character is quote unquote modern. And it kind of just occurred to me that in that way he is the sort of opposite foil to Hammond. Like, mm-hmm. Hammond is really representing this old school patriarchy idea. And meanwhile, what we know about Malcolm is he's got many, many
wives,
and at least 3 children. And, you can read that a number of ways, but in this discussion, I think what that means is he respects women's autonomy to just leave his selfish ass. But he also, takes his role as a father very seriously and matter-of-factly gives good advice to someone like, Grant. I always get their names mixed
Alan
up.
Grant
Alan
is his
Grant.
name. Yeah.
He's got 2 first names. That's a problem. But, so he gives advice kids are scared sometimes. Just basic stuff to him. So, what we know is he is kind of a modern character in that he represents a complex stance on fatherhood as being separate from husbandry is not the word. It is a word, but it's not that, part, whatever. You know what I'm saying.
Yes.
So, whatever. Why don't you say smart things about that?
I was just about to say the same thing. The first person, when we get to this this moment where, the security system has started shutting down and the people who are out in the cars in the park are initially stranded, the first person to say someone should go check on those kids is Ian Malcolm, because he is right about everything. And he's a good foil to Hammond. He's also a pretty good foil for Alan Grant, whose whole arc, if anybody goes through a dramatic arc from the beginning to end, it's him, because he goes from this idea of being very opposed to the idea of being a father, and he doesn't like kids, and he doesn't know how to act around them, and he's weirdly hostile to this kid who is on his dig site for some reason, towards seeing that he is both capable of the responsibility towards children and the nurturing process. He is not just oh, yes, I will go out and provide meat for these children to eat, and that is my role as a father. He hugs them and he comforts them, and there's this moment where, Lexi is panicking because the lawyer left them in the car alone, and that's such a frightening thing for her. And all he really does in that moment is say, I'm not going to leave you.
No, but he says, but I'm not going to do that.
In his strange, transatlantic accent that he uses the whole time.
Yeah, it changes the whole movie. We got to get the accent coach on this guy.
Yeah, I don't know where he's supposed to be from. But in some ways, it's kind of a coming-of-age story for Grant, much more so than it is for the kids. Because, we see the girl get more confident over the course of the story, but Grant is the one who is very different at the end of the story than he is at the beginning.
Yeah, the kids already show up as just bosses. One's a dino expert and one's a legitimate hacker.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah.
They're 8 and 12.
Yeah, they're very competent children. And this is interesting, both as an entry into the Spielberg canon and as a reflection of the United States in the 1990s. So one of the things that I wanted to research for this episode is where were public discussions of fatherhood in the 90s? And I found a article from the 1996 issue of the Los Angeles Times written by Cheryl Stolberg. And it starts with the most 1990s rhetoric I have ever read in any piece of writing whatsoever. And if Dr. Bennington, if you would just read that for me real quick.
I can't promise that I won't lose my beans. I read this for the first time this morning and just was howling on the porch, but I'll give it a go. Nobody would ever accuse Alan Clark of being a lousy father. For more than 20 years, he has pressed his nose to the grindstone at work. He keeps the mortgage paid and the lawn mowed. He has shuttled his 3 kids to more weekend soccer games than he can recall. Isn't that what good dads do? The 49-year-old mortgage broker is not so sure. In 1993, ding, 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 Clark had what can only be described as a fatherhood epiphany. It washed over him, crashing like an ocean wave, when the leave-it-to-beaver life he thought he had built for his family suddenly seemed on the brink of collapse. A couple of kids got shot a few blocks from his house. What the fuck? I can't... Kelcee, I can't.
You have to keep reading. It gets we're not laughing at the idea of people getting shot, to be clear. It's what happens next in this quote.
No, it's also that it's all just one paragraph. And this is just buck wild to me. The transition here is non-existent and I just wasn't prepared. So I'll try it again. when the Leave It to Beaver life he thought he had built for his family suddenly seemed on the brink of collapse. A couple of kids got shot a few blocks from his house. A punk with, quote, purple hair and pierced everything, end quote, hassled his son. It's hard not to laugh at this. I know. His older daughter... Sorry. This one kills me. This is ridiculous. His older daughter saw kids with knives at the local middle school. His younger girl glimpsed marijuana in her 6th grade class. Everywhere Clark looked, he spotted evidence that, quote, the moral fabric of the country was failing. And not failing on some distant inner city block, but right here in his suburban San Diego backyard, and threatening to take his kids down with it. After years of, quote, running on autopilot, this veteran father was seized with self-doubt. Clark recalls wondering, do I really know my kids? How can I steer them clear of trouble when I have no clue what is going on in their lives? How can I get a clue when I'm so busy working I barely have time to talk to them? Holy crap.
Ooh, so it's a rich text. It's a rich text to this article. I just love the mentality of a 49-year-old in 1993 who says, here is a list of things that are all equally bad. 2 kids getting shot in my neighborhood.
Horrible, by the way. Like, what?
People bringing knives to a middle school.
Terrifying.
Pretty bad. A punk with purple hair hassling his son.
Okay, hassling my son, I don't like that. But the specific quote in the article, purple hair and pierced everything. It's like, okay, did he hassle him by showing that he has pierced genitals? Like, what? How severe is this? Anyway, it's probably
he had like a nose ring, and this man is like, put him in prison.
Yeah, this dude sounds like the most conservative father I've ever heard in my life.
I mean, it's certainly
the moral fabric of America.
Yeah, this was the 90s, though. The thesis of this article, it is ultimately, I think, well-meaning, despite that list of absurdity. She glimpsed marijuana. Oh, no, she's a fallen woman now. So there is this sense in the country that there is a crisis of morals happening, and it is at least partially the fault of fathers being more focused on their work than their families, which is a pretty big departure from how fatherhood has typically been conceived of in this country, at least, and especially among like middle class, upper middle class white families, right? Like the idea that your father would be a caretaker over your mother or, you know, some other woman in your life, or grandmother, or an aunt, something like that. It was sort of new in the 90s. That was not a mainstream idea. And there was this swing at that time towards more fathers taking on caretaking roles. Things that would have been traditionally held by women. So here's a quote that I'll read. Today, by choice or because of job loss or unusual work hours, 1 in 6 preschoolers is cared for by his or her father. From 1965 to 1988, that figure remained stable at 1 in 7, according to the Families and Work Institute in New York. Single fatherhood is also on the rise. The percentage of single men caring for their children has quadrupled in the last quarter of a century, from 1 in 100 in 1970 to 1 in 25. At the same time, the absence of fathers is reaching epidemic proportions in America, which bears the unwelcome distinction of leading the world in fatherless families. Tonight, about 40% of the nation's children will go to sleep in homes apart from their biological fathers. And of course, like, so those statistics sound like, oh, God, big and scary. The article does feel the need to point out that number is higher among Black families, while doing nothing whatsoever to unpack any of the reasons why Black fathers might not be able to participate in their families to the extent that they might want. Just as a reminder, this is the mid-90s. There were some things happening that might have, had some effect on the sort of relationships between fathers and families. This article doesn't want to talk about that. And part of that is just because this discussion was politically solvent at the time. So I have another quote for you to read for me.
Sure. And, I think there's something really interesting that connects this quote that I'm about to read to the one that I just read previously. And it's a myth that I think we need to talk about. So I'll read it first. The Clinton administration has caught fatherhood fever as Vice President Al Gore spearheads an effort to make more, quote, father-friendly government workplaces and programs, which all too often have ignored fathers or, at best, viewed them simply as a means of child support. In the process, Gore has become the nation's paterfamilias, his own fatherhood epiphany, there's that word again, when his son was hit by a car and nearly died a few years ago is well known. Recently, Gore has taken to telling a more upbeat tale of the time he showed up late for a meeting with the president of Uzbekistan because his daughter's soccer game went into double overtime, and it was his turn to hand out the post-game snacks. I do like that story better. Quote, every institution in America must begin formally to see fathers as not just a paycheck for child support payment, end quote. The vice president said last month in a speech urging employers to offer fathers flexible work schedules, the option to telecommute, and time off to attend school functions. Quote, we've got to go beyond this idea of fathers as invisible men, end quote. I'll just come out of the gate swinging here and say that the thing that bothers me that unites these two quotes is, one, the word epiphany, and two, that these epiphanies came from stories of intense violence. These old dads needed something like shootings and weapons in their neighborhood and or a near-death experience of their child. So goes the narrative. Mm-hmm. Not to pin anything on these two dudes. I don't know Al Gore and the other dude. But, like, it reinforces, back from my days as a literature scholar, this reinforces a really dangerous story, a stereotype, that men specifically, because we're so tough and strong, we need a violent epiphany. We need a brutal catharsis that only through the death, the violence, the sort of, these hyper-violent tales can we begin to understand something about emotions like grief and sadness and all this. And it's horrifying. And earlier I meant to say that one of the reasons when I first sort of formally got interested in the idea of masculinity studies vis-a-vis anti-violence was through scholars like Michael Kimmel and Jackson Katz. And I introduced you a little bit to Jackson Katz, a documentary known as Tough Guys, gets at this idea of machismo and the way that men are presented with stories throughout various media that reinforce parts of their identity. And this is one that I think is particularly vile, that men can only learn things through these hyper-violent, confrontational, cathartic moments. And to see this rampant in the sort of 90s media, which, the scholars that I mentioned were writing around those kinds of events as well. So, it makes sense. But to see that in journalism, boy, howdy, it's a bummer. It's a real bummer. But at the same time, it's also kind of like, wow, we've come really far, I guess. Yeah. That's uplifting. It hasn't been that long ago, which is why it's both a bummer and also really great, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's something that the father from the beginning of the LA Times article is kind of driving at when he says, like, I don't know anything about my kids. Like, he's gone at work all day, and so he's not there when his kids come home and they say, like, oh, here are all the cool things that happened to me at school today, or like, here, I made a new friend and this is what they're like. All he hears is the most dramatic stuff that gets filtered from their stories to him. So it is just like, there were drugs at school today. There were knives at school today. That's the only thing that he knows about his children. And the research does support this idea of invisible men. Something like 25% of American children in the 90s only saw their father for an hour a day or less. And so functionally, these men really don't know anything about their children. So one of the things that there are these resources that crop up in the article. They talk about something called the Family University, which was created by a man named Paul Lewis, which is a series of seminars directed at fathers that aim to teach men, and eventually they expanded to all parents, just literally how to interact with your kids in productive ways. And most of them involve what we would consider now to be pretty basic ideas about just talk to your kids about the things that they like, set aside time to actually get to know them as human beings and not just as like these vulnerable things that you have to protect and bring money home for. And the LA Times article, it goes out on the same sort of high note that it started on. It includes this list of advice for fathers. So if you're a father out there and you're wondering, how do I connect with my kids? We have great news. The LA Times has some pieces of advice brought to you by Paul Lewis, the creator of Family University. So Spencer, if you would read these out and give our listeners this very valuable information about how to connect with their kids, please.
Can we remind the audience what year this was published?
I believe it was 1996.
96. Okay, now, so just some of these sound a little silly. Like this first one's good advice, but it's one of these that's kind of basic to us now. It says, take photos of your kids doing things right. Daily chores, cleaning their rooms, doing homework. Set aside special pages in the family album for the snapshots. Let me just break that one down for a second because... Like, first of all, it presumes there's a family album, which means that you're intentionally taking photos of family members to keep track of and, like, look back over time, which is already a very good, solid check. Like, great job. You're being a good dad or caretaker. Yeah. Like, also, this one could just say, take photos of your kids. Like, yeah. Pay attention to them and find them worth taking photos of. And, like, that's good enough. But it specifically says doing things right, which I think points out, like, hey, make sure that you're highlighting when your kids are doing a good job at every stage of their development. Like, there might come a time in their life where the best thing they can contribute to society is making their bed correctly. And they deserve praise for it, just like you want praise for it at your job or whatever. Right. And, like, there's, like, a lot of good advice packed into how to treat kids in this first one. That's just one, okay? And, like, it kind of, sounds a little basic. Okay, second one. This one's a little extra, all right? It's easier now, though. This would have been harder in 96. It's easier now. If you have to go out of town, tape record yourself reading bedtime stories for your children to listen to while you're gone. So you don't even have to do it that way. Now you can FaceTime them. Most people have smartphones and tablets and junk. Like, you barely have to be gone at all. Okay, first two, good. Good advice. Third one, kidnap your child for lunch. No, don't kidnap anyone. Let's not normalize kidnapping any child, especially our own children, seeing as how most of the children that get kidnapped are by one or most of their parents or something. Like, don't do that.
That's true.
Find out the time school breaks for lunch. Notify the office and show up outside the classroom door. At least they say notify the office. Still bad advice.
I don't think at this day and age you would get far enough into the school to show up outside their classroom door, unfortunately.
This one's interesting. I'm not sure how it ties into fatherhood. Switch places at the dinner table. Have everyone sit in someone else's customary chair and behave like the person whose chair they are in.
Oh, that's such a recipe for people getting their feelings hurt. Oh, my God.
Dangerous improv. Next one. Take your appointment book. This one cracked me up. So 90s. Take your appointment book to dinner. Show each family member your schedule for the next 2 weeks and write in a date with each of them. 2 weeks from now, do it again. This one is my personal favorite and the most ridiculous of all. On your business card, under your title, so for me that would be Dr. Spencer Todd Bennington, instructor of writing, and blah, blah, blah. Insert the line, father of, followed by the names of your children. The card will make your kids feel they get equal billing with your career.
No, it won't.
No. And it's going to look ridiculous. You're just going to write this on? Like, so stupid. Sorry, that's a bad advice.
And also, like, this is my paranoid brain. Like, I don't need my business contacts, like, knowing the names of all my kids. Like, I
prefer they didn't.
I don't know. That's my 2020s paranoia, I suppose. But
really odd one.
It really would make that scene in American Psycho, I think, much richer. Very funny.
It's not eggshell white, it's alabaster white, and I'm the father of Alexander White. Anyway, this one's good advice. Find a magazine. Do you know what a magazine is? Anyway.
Do kids these days know about magazines?
Find a zine. Find a blog that's devoted to your child's personal hobbies or interests.
Start a Tumblr dedicated to your child's personal hobbies or interests.
Then give him or her or them a subscription and read it together.
That's nice.
That one's a good one. It's like, hey, literacy is important. I want to spend time with you. Let's do something together that you're interested in. All right.
This one is funny. But again, in the right place. List the name of the best 5 dads you know. Then create an opportunity, a phone call, lunch, etc., to ask them these 2 questions. What key ideas guide you as a father? What 3 family activities do you most enjoy? Okay, again, pretty good advice, very stilted. And if there are dudes out here just straight up mayonnaise handshaking this and literally reading off this script, like, it's silly. But, like, the idea of communicating with fathers about fatherhood is good. It's part of the reason we're creating this discourse community.
Yeah. Yeah, these all strike me as coming from the assumption that the dad in question, has a corporate job at which things like informational interviews and business cards are, a thing that you use.
Shoulder pads.
But it is all driving at this idea of, just make some time for you. Don't just be at work all day. Or if you are going to be at work, try to find ways to communicate at work that you're also a person with a family and you care about that family, etc. This is a complete aside, but while I was researching fatherhood, I found out that the federal government has a website called fatherhood.gov. And it
Stand by your woman.
Stand by your woman. It's incredibly, it's a good resource. It has a bunch of research about the role of fathers in their children's lives. It has, information for people who want to hold these seminars in real life for men that they know. It has a dad joke generator.
Oh my God.
And it hosts a documentary called Dadication, which we might have to watch at some point.
Oh, we're going to put links to this in whatever description
Yeah, it
we
looks
have.
really cute.
Dad joke generator.
So-
Did you generate any?
I sure did. Would you like to hear a dad joke?
Boy, howdy. More than anything. Lay it on me, computer.
Okay, what do you call a man with a rubber toe?
I don't know. What do you call a man with a rubber toe?
Roberto.
Oh, I'm delighted.
It's very good.
Roberto.
Yeah, so it's a movement that started in the 90s. Emotionally engaged fathers were kind of having a moment. So it doesn't surprise me that this theme is reflected in the movie of 1993, Jurassic Park. And I do kind of have a question. So we are both 90s kids. Does this movement sort of square with your experience growing up as a kid in the 90s? Did you have a sense that this conversation about fatherhood was in the air?
No, I didn't have a sense that the conversation was in the air because I was born in 1990. So when I knew about the conversation, it was when I was researching it later. When you asked me to think about this question earlier, I thought okay, well, what did I know about fatherhood? Well, my dad was always very intentional with trying to spend time with me. And I think that resonates with a lot of this advice. He worked very hard at a lot of different jobs and was absent sometimes just because he was working such odd hours. He would work from very early in the morning to very late at night. He'd work on weekends. He worked on Sundays because he worked for various churches. But the thing was, I was with him frequently in a lot of strange ways. I would accompany him because he worked for himself. He tuned pianos and went out in the field, as it were. And so I was with him in ways that I couldn't be with a father who worked a corporate job.
Right.
And so for a long time, that made our relationship really solid because we were similar in a lot of ways. We thought in a lot of the same ways. And my dad got to be the dad he wanted to be, the sort of wise, in touch, capital R, romantic.
Yeah.
And I was impressionable and believed it, and we vibed, right? Mm-hmm. I have an older brother that had a very different experience with my dad.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because I had sort of an equal but opposite experience with my own father, whereas instead of hustling through most of my childhood, my dad was just a stay-at-home dad for my very early childhood. My mom worked during the day. She was a school teacher. And my dad actually did work. He just worked in the afternoon because he was a high school track coach for most of my young childhood. So it was mom was gone during the day and dad was home. And then in the afternoon, either I would maybe go to work with him or mom would come home and she would kind of take over from there. But one of the sort of odd jobs that my dad did have was being a nanny for some other kids in the neighborhood. And I do remember that being a thing. Like, there is already this sort of trend where people would refer to my dad as Mr. Mom, like, to his face, to the point that he kind of, like, took it on as his own little, like, moniker. And I remember being sort of uncomfortable with that. Partially because it sort of implied that my mom, like, wasn't around, which she was. She would come home at, like, 3 p.m. every day, which is not abandonment, if you think about it. But it also felt like I always kind of got the sense that people didn't think my father was acting the way that a man and a father should. Pretty much all of my life, my mom has made more money than he has worked more hours than he has. And that, like, by being physically present with my brother and I, he was, like, doing something wrong. Like, there were people who just literally thought that was a bad, abusive dynamic, that mom would be gone and dad would be there and the kids would just be there with him. And, like, how could you do this to them? And I was just sort of like, my dad is good with kids. He just is. He's very good with kids. I never really figured out what the problem was, but there was this sort of, like, push and pull of, like, you know, if you're not out making money and you're letting your woman go out and make the money for your family, like, how could you? You're not even a real man. And I don't know. It just always struck me as sort of unfortunate that he was being told that this work that he loved to do was beneath him and that he should be ashamed of doing it, when that thing was taking care of the beings that he had helped bring into the world.
Yeah, meanwhile, my dad, I think, just doubled down on, like, because he had so many jobs of his choosing, like, he just kept getting more and more so that he could maintain this identity of the breadwinner, despite the fact that my mom always had the consistent salaried job.
Yeah.
Like, so it's odd to think about, like, the hoops we go through and the things that we do to ourselves as men to reinforce this institutional identity of what it means to be a father or masculine at all, you know?
Yeah. And I imagine that being a father at a time when this conversation was starting to happen did feel a little bit like being pulled in multiple directions for the first time, where you're being granted this little bit of freedom by people who are saying, no, like, the vice president goes to his daughter's soccer games. Like, you should be involved with your kids. But there are still the pressures of the rest of the world saying, but somebody has to pay the mortgage and somebody has to buy food. And, like, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about that kind of pressure. You know, I associate that with a lot of the conversations around motherhood, of, like, how can you have it all, quote unquote, where for much of history in this country, the idea of fathers having it all was not even a thing. This was sort of the first era where there was this widespread, like, no, you should also be engaged with your kids. And, like, how do you rearrange your whole life to make sure that you can do both of those things? It's interesting. And to bring this back around to Jurassic Park, we kind of see that in the way Alan Grant sees his relationship to children as, like, not so much as a disciplinarian or an educator as he sort of sees himself at the beginning, but as, like, a nurturer. And we see him being sort of visibly comfortable in that role. And that's just an interesting reflection of that larger conversation, I think.
Meanwhile, Hammond maintains the identity of not growing, not evolving in the language of Jurassic Park, and only thinking of people as creatures to be pleased, whether through gift or spectacle.
Right.
And that's always what he's trying to do. He's trying to impress and put on the biggest show and, sort of get love and respect as currency. He can't think about anything other than through this economic lens, whereas eventually someone like Grant can understand caretaking as compassionate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's what makes Hammond ultimately a very sad character to me, because
the worst, yeah.
It's what profound loneliness to not be able to make that transition from thinking of yourself as a provider in a capitalist system to realizing that what your grandkids wanted all along was just for you to be physically present and not knowing how to do that. And at least in his case, seeing other men take that role in a very literal way and say, like, I have cared for them better than you did. And in fact, you hurt them profoundly and almost got them killed because you are so unable to transition from this old school capitalist mindset. Very sad.
Yeah.
Very sad is John Hammond. And that last shot of him standing outside the helicopter as everybody else is trying to escape, there's this moment where you're like, is he just going to be like, just leave me here with my dinosaurs? It's what I deserve.
I think that's what he was thinking about.
So to take another sort of step back here, because not everybody watching this movie will necessarily want to be a father or a parent. So what do you think viewers can take away from this discussion about how to be like a good person and a good member of society, even if they're not necessarily like, oh yes, I will have and raise children?
In the wise words of Leo McGarry, there's a way to be a person. And the way that's very explicitly made in this movie, if there's one takeaway, I love the line by Ian Malcolm when he's like, your scientists were so concerned with whether or not they could, no one stopped to ask if they should. And that is a universal lesson for anyone who is interested in, design, humanities, the sciences, like making anything, dealing with any group of people. If you want to exist in the world, you should definitely be asking those ethical questions. That's what he's getting at. It's like on the ethical, moral, axiological level of this question, should we, in Kelcee's words, resurrect Jesus zombie dinosaurs? Could we? Well, yeah, we'll just pump them full of frog DNA. Okay. But like, should we do that? Should we?
Yeah.
And like the fact that he's the only person in the room explaining the importance of that kind of questioning to people just reinforces the divide between the mindset of people like Malcolm who exist post-'80s and the radical turn compared to the Hammonds of the world who literally could just be a colonial figure. Mm-hmm. Like their mindset and the way they view the world and what's right and what's wrong and what's violence and what's not violence is truly... I think, sort of emblazoned in that quote. And that I think, is the biggest takeaway for anyone.
Yeah, I think in addition to on one hand, like, be aware of the power that you have in the world and don't just follow along this line of, like, strength is good and greed is good and you can go out into the wilderness with a gun and come out victorious because you're the biggest, strongest man alive. The flip side of that coin, at least, I watch this movie as a woman. And so, of course, I'm always like, okay, where are the women? Like, there are lots of men in the room and that's fine. But like, where's the person that I can cling on to? And we get some pretty good examples here in Ellie and Lexi and even like Tim to a certain extent, who all, as I said before, get to participate in their sort of plan to get off the island successfully. Everybody contributes at one point or the other. And importantly, they're all connected to each other the whole time. The only people who die in this movie, other than the guy at the very beginning who needed a union on his side for his poor workplace conditions, people only die when they go off on their own. And it's not just that people are staying together, it's that each person gets to use their particular talents to help one another and through communicating with each other. Even in the scene when Laura Dern's character is like by herself trying to get the power back on, she is connected to Malcolm with the headset. And so she's able to keep those lines of communication open. And so they're always sharing expertise with one another. Tim's knowledge of dinosaurs certainly comes in handy, and Lexi's knowledge of Unix systems. I would have sworn before Congress that it was a Linux system.
Me too.
But it is not. It is a Unix system. And it's the connections that end up saving them at the end of the day. So that is another lesson, is to not discount the expertise of people who traditionally would not have been looked to for their expertise, such as women and children.
Well, and again, I'll reiterate here, but the others that were seen as expendable in this movie also had valuable expertise, but they were just written off as expendable bodies of color or foreign elements. Like, because my boy Harpoon was that too. He's a mercenary, right? Like, I mean, he's a
hunter.
Yeah. So, well, he's a hired gun from South Africa or Australia or somewhere.
One of those.
And, like, he is a similar character to the nameless person who gets murdered in the beginning. And he's also similar to my boy Samuel L. in that, like, his expertise is at every turn discounted and ignored. At every turn.
Right.
And both of them are just there collecting their paycheck from the ultimate evil that ends up getting them all killed.
Right.
Like,
Well, and that's
chewed up in the machine.
That's the thing that underscores both of their deaths as well, is like, why are they the only person at this whole park doing that job? Why is Muldoon the only, like, animal expert and weapons expert? Why is, after Nedry is gone, why is there only one other IT guy so that Samuel L. Jackson has to do everything by himself? There are labor practices underscoring
and
a lot
I can't
of the horror
underscore enough. Every person who dies in the film, the nameless native worker, Samuel L., Harpoon, Nedry, the lawyer.
The lawyer, yep.
Hammond is directly responsible for every single one of those deaths.
Yes, directly.
And they were all people in his care, but he did not care for them. He did not care about human life to the extent that he cared about his magnificent creation and what the hell ever. Like, I literally, the great exploration of science and the natural, like, blig, whatever. Yeah. He's horrible. He's horrible.
You cannot pick abstract principles over people. I have one last question for you.
Oh,
I think
boy.
this just occurred to me. So this is just pure opinion.
Great.
For you as a man, because this is a question that comes up a lot in, like, horror media, is, like, there is so much exploitation of the female body in media traditionally. You think of your old slasher movies where it's just like, why is there always someone getting killed in the shower? And why is that person always a girl? Like, why does this happen? So do you think Jeff Goldblum in this movie is like an empowering depiction of masculine sexuality? How do you feel about that?
One of my favorite conspiracy theories is that Jeff Goldblum is actually an alien. And so I think that Jeff Goldblum as an alien isn't confined to our ideas of masculinity. And he does some weird stuff in this movie. Like, he's hyper modern. He's, like, got the open shirt all the time, which, like, he's not even, his legs are injured, right? He gets like
his
bulldozed
chest isn't really injured
by a T-Rex, and so because of that injury, he has to have his shirt open the whole time, and he's, like, sitting up like he's like a Roman eating dinner or something, like lounging with his bronzed chest out, like. And perfect eyeliner. God, he's just such a hunk. Like, I think what he represents is just, like, the sort of pre-metrosexual movement. Like, he's manicured. He looks great. He is attractive in non-white ways, which is the alien Jeff Goldblum nature. Yeah. Like, his body is so strange. Like, he's literally one of a kind. Like,
he's so long.
I'm not trying to rag on Jeff Goldblum either. Like, I mean this in the most respectful way. If he is an alien, I'd like to meet more of his people because I think he's great. Yeah, I'm good. I like Jeff Goldblum.
I think he's great. He is right about everything. He is one of the first people to say, like, no, we need to stick together. We need to take care of each other. Sometimes kids get scared. We're going to have to deal with that.
That's a great line, too. Sometimes kids get scared.
Yeah. As if, like,
Thank you, Mr.
it's actually
Rogers.
not an unreasonable thing for them to be doing at this moment. Like,
yeah, hey, did you notice there's freaking dinosaurs here, dude?
Yeah. And I think it's fun that he's, like, sexy but not sexually aggressive. That is a nice turn where he's sort of like, hey, Laura Dern, what's up with you? Oh, you're not? Okay. Well, that's fine. Hey. So just to put a final little button on this, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, like, complete garbage, wouldn't recommend it to anybody, to 10 being like the perfect film, how would you recommend Jurassic Park to the boys of the world?
Oh boy, this is a tough one. I think it's age dependent, and I think people need to know what genre they're getting into. Because again, I didn't see this as a kid. I would not have liked this before age 10. In fact, I may not have liked it before 12. Like, I might have just thought of it as a little bit action, whatever, ooh, spooky, whatever. But, like, it's pretty gory, and watching it last night is pretty scary. Like, I don't want to get eaten by a dinosaur. It's so scary.
Yeah, it's scary.
So, if the viewer is double digits and they are prepared for the genre of horror, and like, happy to be let down if it doesn't meet their criteria of what horror is, like, then I'm going to give it above a 5. It's above average, but it's not stellar to me. I'm going to say in terms of like what it has to like really lend to people who are coming of age and grappling with masculinity, I think it gives us a solid 7.
Okay.
In that it says, hey, just in case you didn't know, gender is a construct, it's fluid, and your identity is yours.
Yeah.
So I gave it a 7. Seven dino footprints. 7 dino bite. 7. I gave it a 7.
7 lunchboxes with the Jurassic Park logo slapped onto them.
Hilarious.
God, there's so much branding in this movie. We didn't even talk about that.
7 blatant product placements.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Spencer, for joining me for this discussion of Jurassic Park.
Oh, no. Thank you, Kelcee, for this rip-roaring good time.
Wow. That was excellent.
That was a dad joke I just generated off the dome.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Shall we have one more dad joke from fatherhood.gov?
Please, God. More than anything.
Okay. What did the ocean say to the shore?
I don't know, Kelcee. What did the ocean say to the shore?
Nothing. It just waved.
Cue the outro music. That was cute.
Right.
All right. Goodbye, dino lovers.
Goodbye. We'll see you next time.
Oh, boy.